chasing a pump is probably not the best way to maximize muscle growth, but achieving a pump probably is. And I'm going to break down exactly what I mean in this video, as there seems to be a lot of conflicting both evidence and opinions around the pump and what sort of a role it plays in training to maximize muscle growth and build your best physique naturally. So I've got some data here that I will also link in the description below at the bottom of it. And let's go ahead and break down some key points that you need to know about the pump. Now, first and foremost, what is the pump? The pump is simply an accumulation of metabolites and lactic acid that causes muscle swelling and is achieved during training, typically achieved with higher repetitions and or, regardless of repetitions, short rest times, right? So lifting weights with short rest times and or high repetitions, combination of both. We all are familiar with the awesome feeling that we get from it. However, there's a couple of caveats. Now, first and foremost, we want to know, does the pump cause muscle growth directly? Now, there's been some hypothesis, and there actually currently still is hypotheses out there suggesting that it may contribute to muscle hypertrophy directly. Unfortunately, there's no data to actually support this clearly. So far, there's going to be certain things, for example, like a 2014 article by Brad Schoenfeld and Brett Contreras that suggested the potential mechanisms for the pump, 5 potential mechanisms, one of which was cell swelling and how this may play a role to trigger an anabolic response in the form of more hypertrophy over time, because this cell swelling basically causes a threat to the cell's integrity, which triggers anabolic signaling, okay? Unfortunately, with other data directly looking at cell swelling and its impact on hypertrophy, the measurement process and a few other limitations can't allow us to actually claim that there is a likelihood that the pump directly causes growth. So as of right now, it's probably not accurate to say that the pump directly causes growth just for the sake of the pump alone. So, you know, you can easily get a pump right now if you go and do a very light weight for 100 reps nonstop. In fact, you can do that with push-ups, let's say. 100 push-ups in a row would be pretty impressive, but nonetheless, if you do that, how much mass are we actually building? Actually, probably not all that much. Maybe even none at all, because you'd be advanced by that point. You need to achieve mechanical tension to drive growth. And just forcing the cell to swell via the muscle pump and just lifting for the sake of a pump and chasing it could actually impact negatively how much proper stimulus we achieve to grow muscle, especially the more advanced you get. So that 2014 article, there's another piece of data that was, again, looking at cell swelling directly, but it's just not solid enough to make any claims on. Now, with that said, the question then becomes, okay, well, the pump doesn't directly grow muscle based on what we know yet. By the way, the hypothesis still exists. It's not been debunked. It's not for sure the pump plays no role in muscle growth. And there's certainly still viable potential options for the pump to play a role in muscle growth. We're going to cover a little bit more nuance surrounding that. But, you know, the problem is now people are wondering, well, should we maybe just avoid the muscle pump altogether? Because it seems like all it does is accumulate fatigue, which prevents more mechanical tension on subsequent sets. And the answer to that is probably not. That's just another extreme end of the spectrum. And here's the thing, right? It doesn't really make much sense for hypertrophy to avoid the pump completely. These days, doing sets of 4 reps is becoming more and more common. Now, obviously, 4 reps close to or all the way to failure, sure, are still going to stimulate muscle growth, but it is likely inferior to a set with a little bit more moderate load, probably not even all the way to failure, but very close, and a more moderate rep range as a result, which means you will also get a little bit more of a pump typically if we're looking at somewhere between 6 and 15 reps, which is the general rep range that probably makes the most sense to do most of your work at. Hey, the occasional 4 rep set, 3 rep set, totally fine. You want to get a little strength work in there? No problem. But the thing is now people have, again, as always, the pendulum swings from one side to another. Now people are swinging from the pendulum of all the way over to actually fuck the pump, avoid the pump. It's not good. And I understand why people cling to these ideas. It's mainly because it's very contrarian. People love contrarian ideas because it seems like, oh yeah, now we know something others don't. And now you can look at a Mr. Olympia and say, this motherfucker who's absolutely massive, clearly knows at least something of what he's talking about, has no idea what he's talking about. I know more, even though I've been doing this for 3 months. So people love contrarian, polarizing ideas. That's understandable. But biases start to accumulate as a result of that. And then you have people that are literally, they have phobias of accumulating potential fatigue. So they're scared of going above like 7 reps because they are literally afraid of excess fatigue. It's literally become to that point. They'll justify it with, oh no, it's the CNS fatigue that's going to negatively impact subsequent sets and so on. First of all, the data does not show clearly enough whatsoever that going above 8 reps is detrimental to growth in any regard. Obviously, we have the data that shows that anywhere between 5 and 30 reps is fine to maximize growth. Again, caveats are in there. I'm going to discuss and break it down. But regardless, it's not accurate for most people to train with only 7 or 8 reps or less all the time because you're afraid of fatigue that is mostly peripheral in the short term, which you want to manage. But regardless, I think the point I'm trying to make here is no, we don't necessarily want to avoid the pump because it doesn't potentially directly cause muscle growth. It may indirectly cause muscle growth. There are mechanisms by which this is possible, just yet to be proven. Don't forget, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. That's something to keep in mind that people forget. Yes, mechanical tension is very well supported to directly cause muscle growth. But that doesn't mean that you only optimize for mechanical tension in one modality and that's it, okay? The pump can get in the way of achieving tension, keep this in mind, but only if you're not careful, okay? So lighter loads means you have to go closer to failure more often. And if rest times are too low and metabolites are not dissipated in time, then that could actually make the next sets less stimulative. And that's obviously important. So this is where rest times do come into play. Now, that doesn't mean that 90-second rest time is not enough and it has to be 2 minutes. It depends on the exercise. Typically smaller exercises, you'll be fine with 90 seconds. As long as it's not detrimental to performance on your next set. If your pump is so insane because of your prior set, you didn't rest enough to where when you do the next set, simply because of the pain of the pump, you stop because not you're getting close to momentary muscular failure, which will maximize tension, but rather you're stopping because the pain is too much. The stimulation on that set may be less than you otherwise would have had. However, you could also just do another set. You don't have to have a fear of a little bit extra fatigue from it because you may also get the benefits of what the pump can do for you. Once again, this cell swelling may trigger anabolic responses. There's other things, angiogenesis, other things that may potentiate as a result of the pump over long periods of time, which means over long periods of time, more hypertrophy may be induced by achieving a pump as well as mechanical tension. So a lot of these studies where people are like, no, the pump doesn't cause any growth at all, they're all focused more on short-term stuff, okay? So keep in mind, just as long as you are taking adequate rest times in between sets to ensure that the pump is not getting in the way of the mechanical tension, and keep in mind that it's probably more ideal to take these lighter loads that are going to failure on smaller muscle groups, not on larger ones. Why are we doing this on squats or on deadlifts or on hack squats? Any sort of quad-based movement, massive rowing movements, probably not ideal either. So some muscles also may individually respond to a certain rep range and loading and proximity to failure versus others for some people. And to deny this outright would not exactly be science-based or accurate. So, for example, my arms, which are extremely resistant to growth, there's 2 benefits of using something that's a little bit more geared towards getting a pump from, which is lighter loads, much closer or all the way to failure, slightly shorter rest time so I can accumulate more volume that way. That's fine. They respond better over time. Now, it's not cell swelling that I'm measuring later. No, I'm talking about over several months. It's very clear, dry first thing in the morning after several days have gone by, and I'm used to that sort of workout. There's more size being put on my arms. Whereas for my legs would actually probably shrink based on my experience if I was doing higher rep sets, because now it's too much cardio. My legs don't need that much volume. They get absolutely, in fact, I'm sitting here right now talking, my legs are destroyed from doing a relatively low volume workout a few days back. Low volume, high proximity to failure, massive compound lifts. This works for my legs, and it might work for your arms. There are people out there that barely need to hit arms, and their arms are a strong point. So individuality matters here. and you have to experiment to see. There's some instances where more of a pump-driven sort of moderate loading or even higher rep range, lower loading system may work better for you. So these are some things to keep in mind when it comes to the pump and how it's totally viable. It's not something you should avoid because there's some benefits you may miss out if you avoid it completely. So people hate anecdote these days, but there's definitely something to be said about the fact that hypertrophy training has always been for a long time based around moderate reps and loads, right? We know pretty definitively, obviously not 100%, but for the most part, we can very confidently say that very high loads with very low reps, 5 or less frequently, is going to trigger the best strength gain results you can get, okay? As is done by a 2017 meta-analysis by Schoenfeld and colleagues. It was clear there that lower reps and higher loads directly causes a favorable effect size on strength gains. And people mistake that for thinking it's hypertrophy gains. So because you continuously gain strength on a lift, especially when all of a sudden you switch to heavier loads, lower reps, you think, oh, this is the best progress I've seen in a long time. Fuck the pump, I don't need it. It doesn't necessarily mean you're building muscle. You're probably recruiting neural adaptations that are triggering faster strength gain, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's more muscle growth. And again, avoiding the pump altogether may only cause you to miss out on potential long-term gains that you otherwise would have had if you were more inclusive with your training. The benefit about bodybuilding style training where we're actually building muscle, hypertrophy, and building a physique is it's a lot more flexible. Same with strength gain. Listen, you want to be a powerlifter, you're going to be a lot more rigid with your training. You have to train a lot more with higher loads and lower reps, very little high rep training, not really necessary, and very long rest times, and very specific exercises. You want to increase your bench over time, you better not be doing more machine press than you are doing bench press, because that's also a skill that needs to be learned. With hypertrophy-based training, rest times can be more flexible. You can have a wide range of reps. You can vary your reps over time. You can have a wide exercise selection. All of this stuff needs to keep in mind because hypertrophy-based training is significantly different when we have people out there now claiming that all of these components that are associated with typical hypertrophy-based training are just completely null, and it's just tension. Now you start to see things shift towards like a powerlifting strength style of training. Sure, muscle can be gained, but will it be maximized? Likely not. Also, stimulating reps, okay, for a lot of people that are still stuck on the stimulating reps model or believe in it wholeheartedly, and it's got some good in it for sure. Keep in mind, stimulating reps can happen as far out as 8 reps, and in some cases even more. We know this based on the latest meta-regressions on failure. So if you're going to do sets lower than 8 reps consistently, all the way to failure doesn't really matter. All the way to failure or not all the way to failure, you could still be missing out on some stimulation, some stimulus that causes more growth. And that stimulus would have been achieved if you also achieved the pump while achieving the mechanical tension you're after in a more reasonable rep range across more of your work. So that's another thing, is if you're doing lower rep sets and you're avoiding the pump altogether because you're seeing strength gain, progressive overload, and you think that that's all muscle, the problem as well there is you have to do more sets to accumulate the same total amount of volume, which we know is directly correlated to muscle hypertrophy. It may not be directly correlated to strength as much. So sure, your strength gains are going up through the roof. You're not gaining muscle every single week. All of a sudden, you're an intermediate lifter. Oh, I see the best gain in my life. Strength gains, okay? If you've been lifting between 6 and 15 reps most of your lifting career, now you switch to low loads at between 4 and 8 reps, of course you're going to gain strength rapidly. But that doesn't equate to rapid muscle gain all of a sudden, okay? So now, mechanical tension and a pump. This is what we're after. We want both. Do not chase the pump. And there's a big mistake people make that I'm going to discuss on that. But let's just simplify things. Mechanical tension causes growth directly, as we currently know. Metabolite accumulation may actually help induce tension with lower loads, for instance, in the case of blood flow restrictions. So once again, metabolite accumulation could actually help on some sets to help achieve some mechanical tension as well, as long as you're not using it as your primary method for growth. Unless you're injured, then blood flow restriction training is probably a good option, okay? But if we can achieve more total stimulus on subsequent sets with less peripheral fatigue in the form of metabolite accumulation, then we should be after that, okay? However, we do achieve that mechanical tension by getting close enough to failure on our sets, right? And that's usually within a 3 reps in reserve type of thing. If you have 4 or 5 reps in reserve, sure, some stimulus could have occurred, but it's probably a little bit less efficient than it otherwise could have been. So we know that. And keeping this in mind, the pump could actually also help give us feedback for if we're working the targeted muscles we're trying to work. Now, given the principle of neuromechanical matching, sure, the muscles are going to have to work regardless, but there's nothing to be said about the mind, muscle, and pump connection that you get with the muscle you're trying to execute with. So, especially on compound lifts, you want to do a squat, and you're doing a squat, even if it's Smith machine or free weight, both are great options. But you're starting to feel a little bit too much in the lower back or more in the knees, not getting as much of a quad pump. Whereas opposingly, you're doing something where you're getting a lot more quad pump, less issues in surrounding areas. Well, that's good feedback that you are hitting the muscle group you want, isolating it a little bit more, let's say, and putting all of the tension and stimulus on that muscle group. So the pump can be very useful in that case. And we can also make sure that we reap the, once again, potential extra benefits long-term that may come from inducing a pump alongside the appropriate mechanical tension we want. So that's why it probably makes the most sense to do most of your work in the 6 to 15 rep range. If you start doing too much above that, okay, now it's going to be a little bit less efficient per set. If you start doing too much below that rep range, on the very low end of it, also less efficient, you need more sets to accumulate the amount of volume potentially that you may need for maximum growth. Is something else you don't have to worry about is all this metabolic stress causing all this excess fatigue that you're going to suddenly crumble and lose all your gains from. I mean, let's put it this way. It would be very odd that across the last century, basically like 2 or 3 pro physique athletes have determined that anything other than, you know, the typical 8, 12, 15 rep range where we're getting a pump, getting close to failure, we're working hard, rest times are pretty moderate. To see 2, 3, maybe 4 pro physique athletes during that time identify that, oh, it's only heavy weights with low reps, which isn't even the case. Dorian Yates wouldn't even be one of those. He still used moderate rep ranges. Let's say it's Mike Mentzer or these other low volume hit enthusiasts. That would be odd that every other pro physique athlete, accomplished and not, found that training in a more moderate rep range, inducing a pump, and doing so at a relatively close proximity to failure happened to be the best to growing muscle. No strength athletes came to that conclusion. All strength athletes have always come to the conclusion you lift heavy weights for low reps. No strength athlete basically ever decided, hey, you know what, we should do low weight for high reps. Never, right? There's reasons for this. As much as people hate anecdote, this makes sense. I mean, it's hard to argue against that nonetheless. And so let's talk about the conclusion as to how to look at the pump and use it for maximizing your growth. So while the pump is definitely not something we can currently say directly causes growth, it's not something that I believe we should discard entirely unless you are okay with potentially seeing less possible gains than you otherwise could. Now, again, moderate reps with moderate loads, close proximity to failure will maximize both mechanical tension and a pump. And it's going to help get you feedback on the muscles you're trying to target and likely get the most possible stimulus out of that set, okay? Lifting between 6 and 15 reps is what I recommend for most of your work, and it's probably the sweet spot to induce superior mechanical tension as well as for those worried about the stimulating reps. And it will ensure that you get the most out of each set, more than likely, in a more efficient manner, okay? The only issues with the pump is 2 specific ones that I see people making when it comes to this. Number 1 is you're lifting light loads frequently with short rest times. This is going to be far less efficient. In fact, it's less efficient than lifting heavier reps, a heavier load for lower reps away from failure. It is less efficient than doing that because you're maximizing motor unit recruitment basically every single rep when you start using loads that are somewhere around 80, 75% of your maximum, which is somewhere around 5 to 10 reps, sometimes even more, 12 potentially. So if you're using light loads and you're chasing the pump, this is where the pump becomes detrimental, and you hear bodybuilders saying that stuff like, oh, you got to get blood in the muscle, things like this. That should not be the focus. Maybe tack it in at the end of your training if you like doing that. Preference is always a factor, but do not chase the pump in exchange for proper mechanical tension. And also, the second mistake is believing that the pump itself is enough of feedback to know that you're stimulating growth or even retention. And this is where you get the nonsense of people doing like higher reps and lower weight to tone up. When they're doing cutting, they lift a little bit lighter, and they're doing it with high reps because all they're looking for is to feel a little bit of a pump. And you'll see this all the time in the gym. People doing it, lifting, they hit a pump. You're like, they could have done 10 more reps. Just being that far of a proximity to failure on a set, truly, it's basically a waste of time. And you can do that and still achieve a great pump, which if you believe the pump is crucial for growth, as opposed to doing the right things that I've mentioned in this video so far, that will get in the way of your growth. And you will probably lose muscle if you're doing that, especially on a deficit, okay? It's definitely not a one or the other. It's definitely not a pump is superior, mechanical tension is superior if we had to choose one, but leverage both. There's definitely not a hypothesis that's heavily supported that the metabolic stress in the pump plays no role whatsoever in your muscle growth. So leverage it to the degree of which it makes the most sense. And hopefully this video helped you understand what that might be. But with that said, a few quick plugs. Number one, if you want evidence-based tools to help you achieve your best possible physique in record time, first link in the description helps you with the complete free physique bundle I put together. Tons of tools and resources to help you do that. If you want a month-to-month program that gives you monthly fresh programming for training, nutrition, guidance, coaching support, digital community challenges, and all this other stuff for a monthly membership fee that's very low and amazing value, go ahead and do that. You're already committed gym goer. Go ahead and do that by clicking the link in the description. Second link, Modern Physique Hub. Third, if you want one-on-one coaching with me directly to accelerate to your best results as quickly as you can, one-on-one coaching is open currently. That's the third link in the description below. The fourth is my one-off training and nutrition programs. Check those out. The fourth link, last but not least, if you want the highest quality supplements on the market for a seriously amazing rate, you've got All Max supplements. I'm not sure if you can see them back there. All Max supplements. Fifth link in the description. Use code JMango15 at checkout to get 15% off. And that's it. Hope you guys found this video helpful and understand better what the pump does, the role it plays, and to make sure that you don't chase the pump in place of going after what maximizes your growth, so you can make your training a lot more efficient and not fall for the, I'm just putting blood in the muscle. We gotta get blood in the muscle there. Don't fall for that shit. Hit it hard, get a pump, and get out. Hope this helps. Thanks for watching. Subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. I'm out.